This is 7th grade lesson 3.1. Our objective, students will determine rates from words, tables, and graphs. The standards covered in this lesson are 7 RP 1 and 2B. The page numbers for this lesson are out of the hardcover book, pages 98 through 103, and out of the practice journal, pages 55 through 58. Today we're going to be working with continuing rates. So this example that we're working with here is just working with what we would call a unit rate. So in our example, and this is on page 56 of your practice journal book, if you would like to do them as I go through and do these. As you're working through these, you'll notice that in the sample, we have 6 hours times $12 per hour. So this would be an example of something like maybe if you were working a job. A unit rate is a number over 1. And just like with fractions, when we have a whole number, we always write it over 1. When working with unit rates, you can then go through and cross cancel. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this down here. So this looks like this: 6 hours over 1, because that's our unit rate, times $12 per hour. So that's our 1 hour. I could then go through, and if you notice in the sample above, I can cross cancel units. Just like in fractions, I can cross cancel. So now when I go through to solve my amount of money that I made for that day of work or whatever, I would do 6 times 12, which would give me the $72. Okay, so I'm just going through to show you how they're setting these up. So on letter B, we've got 6 months times $700 per month. So maybe this is like rent to a house, or maybe it's how much money you're getting paid for a certain job. So if I go through and I cross cancel my months and my months, that leaves me with 6 times 700, which would give me $4,200. Okay, letter C, I've got 10 gallons times 22 miles per gallon. So maybe this is your car. Maybe your car gets 22 miles per gallon and you just put 10 gallons of gas in your car and you want to see how far you could go off of that 10 gallons. So we're going to cross cancel our gallons. 10 times 22 would give us 2,200, or not 2,200, 220. Okay, so now our next one, and that would be miles, would be our label. The next one, I have 9 pounds times $3 per pound. This might be something like maybe buying fruit or meat or something like that you would buy by the pound. So once again, we'll cross cancel our pounds. And I would do 9 times 3, which would give me $27. Okay, so I would like you to go ahead, pause your video, and go work your way through letter E. So you've got 13 minutes times 60 seconds per minute. Okay, so 13 minutes turns into 780 seconds. So that's working with a unit rate. So it's just kind of giving us some basics of working with some rates and some ways that we might use a rate. Okay, so our lesson, a ratio is a comparison of two quantities using division. So for example, ratios, maybe we might do dollars and hours, or we might do boys to girls or something like that. So a ratio is going to compare two things. And we're going to use division. So sometimes a ratio is set up as a fraction. Sometimes a ratio will be written out with the words to or with a colon. Ratios will always be written in lowest terms. So we're going to start out with having some scenarios and then reducing down our situation and writing them out in the 3 different formats. Okay, so here's our first scenario. 16 dogs to 12 cats. So the key thing to remember is when you're working with a ratio and you have a word problem, you go in the order that it's stated. So working left to right, if I'm going to work in these two formats, I would do 16 dogs first to 12 cats. Now here's the thing. I cannot go through and leave this as my final answer because that can be reduced down. 4 would go into each of those numbers. So 16 divided by 4 would give me 4 dogs. To 2, or not, sorry, 4 would go into 12 3 times, so to 3 cats. Okay, if we were going to use a colon, it's going to be the same format, only instead of the word 2, we would have a colon. And if I'm going to do the fraction, left to right is top to bottom. So my fraction would look like this, 4 to 3. And I would leave that as an improper fraction when I'm working with a rate or a ratio. Okay, so let's try another one. "35 girls to boys." So girls, colon, boys. So girls to boys. So in this case, 5 would go into each of these. So 5 would go into 35 7 times and into 15 3 times. Now when I write this out, it's either written out as 7 to 3, 7 colon 3, or 7 over 3. Okay, usually these two are the most common ones used when working with ratios and comparing two numbers. A fraction can be used, but it's not used as often. Okay, so this next one, you're gonna go ahead and solve out on your own. So on your whiteboard or your sheet of paper, let's do 25 to 45. So the ratio of 25, we'll say markers to 45 pencils. So I want you to go ahead and do the ratio for this scenario. Okay, so here 5 would go into each of those. So 5 would go into 25 5 times and into 45 9 times. So our ratio was 5 to 9. Okay, so that's working with a ratio and simplifying it. So our next thing that we're going to work with is what they call a rate. So a rate is a ratio of two quantities with different units. So if we're working with, for example, here, words and minutes. So we want to figure out our words per minute. So usually a rate, we have that division bar, not usually, always. And lots of times when we discuss what the label is, we use the word per for that division. So like, for example, if I were to read this, I would read this right here as 60 miles per 2 hours. A unit rate, on the other hand, is just reducing to lowest terms. And it's a unit rate is always over 1 or 1 unit. So here we've got 297 words. So 297 words per 5.5 seconds. Okay, left to right is top to bottom. So now when I do this, I want to change this into its unit rate or its reduced form. So this little bar right here means to divide. So on my calculator, I can go ahead and punch in 297 divided by 5.5, and that's going to give me my unit rate of 54. So my final answer is 54 words per, and when we reduce it, we're reducing it to over 1, and then that would be second. Now, this is probably more commonly written like this, 54 words, and I'm just going to put a W for my words, per, so slash mark is often used, second. And you can use the word per also instead of the slash mark. Okay, this is written out as a unit rate, and you have to understand that these two here are interchangeable. Okay, you could see it either way, those are a unit rate. Okay, so let's try another one. Find the unit rate for $9.60 for 4 pounds. So maybe you're buying 4 pounds of hamburger at the grocery store. So we're going to start out left to right is top to bottom. So $9.60 per 4 pounds. And I'm just going to use LB for pounds. But make sure you leave a space in there so you don't think of that as 41 instead of 4, because I oftentimes do that. So now when we divide this out or change it to its unit rate, top divided by bottom. So $9.60 divided by 4 gives me 2.4. So I have to remember that when I'm working money, I have to have 2 numbers behind the decimal, which means I have to add a 0. So $2.40 per 1 pound. Okay, that can also be written like this, $2.40 per LB or pound. So you are spending $2.40 per pound on whatever this was that you were purchasing. All right, so let's have you guys try one on your own. So here we have 180 miles in 3 hours. So you can pause your video and work your way through this one and get it down to its unit rate. And sometimes you guys will see that M/H as MPH for miles per hour. So sometimes the word per, they just put the P instead. Okay, so that's working with rates and unit rates. So sometimes they give us a table and they ask us to go through and find the rate from the table. So here's what you have to realize, that really as we're working with the table, these are X's and these are Y's. As you guys get older, we're gonna actually be going through and graphing these and then finding a rate from the graph. So you have to understand that those are your X's and your Y's. Okay, and then the other thing that you have to understand is when you're working with a rate, unless they verbally ask for it in a certain way, you are going to do your Y's as your top number and your X's as your bottom. And the reason we do that is as we get a little bit older is we start working with slope. And we have to realize that Y's are our top number of our slope. So when we look at these, just to begin with, I want you to realize that when you're working with a table, we're actually working with a function. And if you look at this, we're gonna notice that there's a pattern that's happening here. So 2 miles to 4 miles, well, that would be a change in 2, so we were adding. So 4 miles to 6 miles, that was a change in 2. And 6 miles to 8 miles, that was a change in 2 or adding 2. And we'll notice that in the amount of money, also we have a sequence happening here where it increases by 24. Increases by 24. So you can see that there's a pattern as we're working through a table. Okay, so I just wanted you to understand that. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and find our rate from the table. So here we have, for our units, we have distances in miles and our money in dollars. So we're working with dollars and miles. So a situation here might be, where would we ever do dollars and miles? It might be maybe where a parent or somebody working their job maybe gets paid so much money per mile that they travel. Like a truck driver, for example. They probably are making maybe a set amount for a trip, but then they're also making so much money per mile that they travel. So here, dollars per mile. So our dollars were, we can pick any scenario, and I'm going to show you on this one that it doesn't matter which one we pick. So I'm going to pick the first one, $24 per 2 miles. Okay, so now if I change that to its unit rate, I would do my 24 divided by 2, which would give me $12 per mile. Okay, or we could write it like this. Okay, so just to prove on this one, and this is the only one I'll do it, is had I picked a different set of these numbers, maybe I picked, we'll do this very last one. Had I worked with that one, let's see if we get the exact same rate. So here I would do my $96 per 8 hours. Okay, so let's check our division on that. So 96, oops. 96 divided by 8 gives me 12 once again. So I just found out that this is still $12 per 1 hour. It's an ugly dollar sign. Okay, so we get the same answer no matter what set we use. But the key thing on this is that we have to make sure that our unit rate, most often, unless they specifically ask for a certain order, is we're going to take our Y's, which are our bottom, off of the table, divided by the top, okay? Distance per dollar probably doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But obviously, if you don't have a lot of background knowledge, neither does dollars per mile, okay? So for now, take your bottom divided by the top. Okay, so let's try another one. So here I have miles and seconds. So we want to know how many miles per second we can go. Not to say that somebody might not want to know seconds per mile, but we're going to do miles per second. So we're going to take our Y's, which are our bottom, and I'm just going to go ahead and take this one. It doesn't matter which set I use. So I'm going to take the top number, 28.8, or not the top, the bottom number, and write it as my top number. And that was my miles over 6 seconds. Okay, so to get our unit rate, we're going to divide that out. 28.8 divided by 6. And when I do that, I get 4.8 miles per 1 second. Or I could write it out like this, 4.8 miles per second. Okay, both of those are acceptable. All right, so I'm going to give you guys one. Remember, it's your bottom number divided by your top number. It's our Y's and our X's, and it'll make more sense as we start working with things that are a little more advanced. Okay, so here I have packages and servings. So like if I were to read through that, I've got 3 packages will give me 13.5 servings. So maybe this is working, I don't know, maybe like potato chips or something like that. So I want to know the servings per package. So if I had 1 package, how many servings, how many people would I be able to serve? So go ahead and pause your video and work your way through this one, finding the unit rate. And you can choose any of those 4 sets to use. So you should have ended up with 4.5 servings per package. So we could serve 4.5 people for 1 package of whatever this is, potato chips, onion rings, whatever it is. Okay, so that's working with rate from a table. The last thing is finding rate from a graph. And we'll work with this more in section 2, but I'm gonna go ahead and give you just the starting point for working with rate from a graph. So our first step is we're gonna choose a point on the graph that crosses at an intersecting point. So if you look at this graph that I have up here, and I'll enlarge this just a little bit, probably not a whole lot because my words are attached to it. Okay, so if I enlarge this and you look at the graph, you'll notice that I actually have points already marked on here. And it doesn't matter which of these points I pick, which of those red points I pick. The key thing to note is that it has to cross at an intersecting point of our grid. So I couldn't pick a point like here because first of all, that's not very well on the line. But second of all, I couldn't tell you if that was a half or if that was 3/4 or 5/8. So you have to pick a point that falls on a corner of your grid. So if I go ahead and pick this one, I'm now going to go through and identify the units that are associated with that point. So I'm going to draw some lines just to make it easier for me. So if I were to connect this point down to my x-axis, this 2 is representing my seconds. Okay, so I've got 2 seconds, and that was my x. And then this, if I follow the line across, is a 3, and that was representing my kilometers. So my y, because notice that my y is right there, equals 3 kilometers. And I'm just going to use km for kilometers. Now, if I want the unit rate, I want to know. In our previous slide, we guys had to do our y's as our first one. So our y is 3 per 2 seconds. Now, if I want to change that, I would do 3 divided by 2, which is going to give me 1.5 kilometers per second. Per second. Okay, so that's working with that graph, and we'll do just a little bit of this now, and you'll understand a little bit more as we start working slope in section 2. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do a few of these for right now. And I want you to take note, had I picked this one up here, Well, then it was, whoops, and then I went off the wrong line. Then it was going here. So my 4 was my time. So before that was my X's are on the bottom. So 4 seconds. And this 6 was my kilometers. So 6 kilometers. This reduces down to still 3/2. Or if I did 6 divided by 4 on my calculator, it's still going to give me 1.5 kilometers per second. So it doesn't matter which of the points I pick. Okay, they still have the same unit rate. All right, so let's look at this one. The cost of gelato. And so for our cost, we have our dollars going up on the Y scale and our scoops on our X scale. So I'm going to pick 2 points. So here I don't have the points picked. So what is the cost per scoop? So if I go through, well, if I could pick 1 scoop, I would, but I can't. See how it's not on a corner? So I'm going to follow this line up until it crosses a corner. And I see here's the first point that it crosses at the corner of the grid. Okay, so when I look at this, I'm going to go ahead and do my 2 numbers. So let's do our Y first, because remember that's always our top number. So our Y is our 3, and that was our dollars per. This is a 2, and that's our scoops. So now if I want to know cost per scoop, now I can divide it out. 3 divided by 2 would give me 1.5, which is $1.50 per scoop. Okay, the next question says, what would the cost be for 12 scoops? So if I look at my grid, well, if I look across here, it only goes out to 10. And you can see my line isn't even crossing at 10. It would have to come clear up here for me to be able to see where it crosses. So now what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to use my information from number 1 to be able to go through and decide that. Well, if it's $1.50 for 1 scoop and I want 12 of those, we're going to do $1.50 times 12 because I want to buy 12 of those scoops. So $1.50 times 12 gives me $18. So it would cost me $18 to buy 12 scoops of ice cream. It's a lot of ice cream that might give you a bellyache. I'm hoping that's a birthday party. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and pull another one out and we'll work through this one. Okay, so here we have the graph shows the distance that sound travels through air. Find the speed of sound in kilometers per second. Okay, so on this graph, I actually do have numbers identified, and I am working with some decimal numbers, which doesn't matter. So I'm just going to pick one of them that I see. We'll go ahead and do this one. Okay, so when I look at that, the numbers that are indicated on there, they're giving me the coordinates. So I know that, yes, if I followed this down, it looks like it's approximately 6. And if I follow this across, it's a little above 2. But here's the thing. There's a reason that they gave us the coordinates here. Okay, we don't have to follow the graph. They're telling us what the numbers are here. So I just have to know which one's which. Well, my 6 is my X and my 2.1 is my Y. And I can remember that by doing my XYZ. But I could also reference the graph and look and see, oh, my 6, that's pretty close to 6 is my seconds. Okay, this a little above 2 is going to be my kilometers. So when we do this, remember we always do our Y's first. So we're going to do this kilometers first, which was our 2.1 over our 6 seconds. Okay, so now if we go through and we do our unit rate, just like we have on the previous slides, we're going to divide it out. So 2.1 divided by 6 seconds gives me 0.35, and that would be kilometers per second. Or you could put 0.35 km over 1 second. So that's it from finding rate from a graph. And I will say probably the rate from a graph is the most difficult just because kids struggle with identifying those points. So that's something that we'll just keep working on and just keep plugging away at those. Good luck with this lesson, guys.